This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and at last Audi has locked in its driver lineup with confirmation that Formula 2 points leader Gabriel Bortoleto will partner Nico Hulkenberg at Sauber next year and beyond. But is it the right choice, and what does it mean for Valtteri Bottas' F1 future? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to talk through all things Sauber is Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, how are you doing? The last time I saw you was in the hotel lobby in Brazil. Things have moved on a bit since then.
Yeah, well, I've made it back to Europe, but you've decided to extend your stay on, well, not that part of it, but the American continent.
Yeah, I've gone rogue. I'm now actually in Washington, D.C. of all places. I've been
throwing your hat into the ring at the last second to save a disaster.
No, I just always wanted to come here. So, yeah, I've been in Washington for about 5 minutes and have just had to basically charge into my hotel, lock my stuff down, and then do an emergency Sauber podcast, because what better cause could there be? So we're very, very sharp because I've been flying for some time. You flew for some time and are probably still suffering the after effects of it. So this is going to be top podcasting.
Yeah, I thought we might have a slightly more normal circumstance when we reconvened for our next recording after the antics of Sunday night in Brazil at the end of what was it must have been about 15 or 16 hours after we woke up that we recorded that. And I actually on that note, I did put something out on social media, just off the back of the Sunday pod, the post race one. A few people, I think mostly in good humour or attempted good humour, pointed out a little bit of low energy, shall we say, or slightly strange energy on that post-race pod. As I did put something out on social media just to clarify in case it crops up again on this pod or any in the next couple of weeks. It's not a big deal. I am having to manage my speech fairly carefully. I just have some let's just say low-level irritation going on at the moment. It's making it very easy for me to slur my words. So I might, if at any point I come across like I'm drunk or disinterested, I promise I am neither of those things. It's just the effort to make sure that I enunciate properly means that I think I'm having to slightly stutter my sentences a little bit more than usual. I'm even less eloquent than I usually am on the podcast. So a little public services announcement just before we get started in case this comes across even stranger than normal on my part.
But what better topic to keep you sharp and on it than anything about Sauber? This is the perfect discussion point. So let's get into it. I think
you're confusing me with you, Ed.
Well, I'm always happy to talk about Sauber. And of course, the news is it's confirmed what was a pretty badly kept secret in the end, that it's bought Gabriel Bortoleto out of his McLaren contract. He'll race for the team. So why has Audi gone for Gabriel Bortoleto?
Clearly, there was a desire to pick a long-term option to partner Nico Hulkenberg. I did think that keeping Valtteri Bottas would be a perfectly legitimate route for Sauber and Audi to take. because I think Bottas has performed very well this year. But I think the problem, and not necessarily because of his own ability, because Nico Hulkenberg has been great most of the year for Haas, but Hulkenberg was signed up back in April. He is 37. Bottas is 35. So even if they only had them together for 1 year, by the end of next season, Bottas will be 36. Hulkenberg will be 38. It's not exactly future-proof as a lineup if they went in that direction. And this is a long-term project, not just in terms of Audi's commitment to Formula One, but just in terms of how much time is going to be required to get anywhere near the level that Audi expects its F1 team to be. Sauber is having quite literally a pointless season. And they need something, I think, to energise the team, and it needs to be something that is set more for the future. Bottas and Hulkenberg together wouldn't have been that, even though I think it would have helped in certain ways in the short term. Bortoleto has a bit more time on his side, and of course is a very good driver in his own right. And I think it would be naive to overlook in discussing why Bortoleto, the impact that various other drivers have made from the junior ranks in the last 12 or 18 months stepping into Formula One, starting really with Liam Lawson, I think, coming in for a few races last year. And then this year, Ollie Behrman's cameos, Lawson again stepping back in, Franco Colapinto, of course. There is a changing of the guard in Formula One with young drivers getting an opportunity. I think Audi wanted a piece of that. Clearly didn't trust Sauber's own Formula 2 champion Teo Pourchaire to fulfil that role, so has looked elsewhere. And Bortoleto ticks a lot of boxes, and I think those are the sort of key reasons why we're here discussing him today, or tonight.
Well, as they said when they announced it, Gernot Dellner, who's Sauber chairman, and he's Audi CEO, isn't he? Said we're currently witnessing a generational shift in Formula One with young drivers immediately making an impact. So obviously quite keen about the exciting young drivers, which is great. I'm really pleased Bortoleto's got a place. I have argued that Bottas might have been the more prudent choice given where the team is, but it's not that I think this is a wrong choice, because I think Bortoleto, with what he's done, obviously winning F3, he's leading F2 at the moment, so he's ticked all those boxes, so he absolutely deserves a place in Formula One.
You mentioned that when you were kind of introducing this part, Ed, that obviously McLaren's had to let him go, or Audi and Sauber had to convince McLaren to let him go. Bortoleto is or has been a McLaren junior, and I believe has had quite an intense program with them, including some old car testing in the testing of previous cars, the TPC program, as you often hear it referred to, because it's less of a mouthful, and a lot of simulator work. And I think McLaren's very pleased with his progression, but there is a very simple reason why McLaren's willing to let him go, and crucially willing to let him go permanently, not on a leash, not on any kind of buyback or recall, because that wouldn't work for Audi. And it doesn't take a genius to work out why McLaren feels it can let Bortoleto go, does it, Ed? And it doesn't really have anything to do with Bortoleto's capabilities as a driver. Yeah, absolutely. They haven't got a space for him. I'm sure they've made a little bit selling him. Audi's certainly got the money for that. And they've always said publicly, well, certainly in recent months, that they'd be willing to do it, because if you can't offer a driver a pathway, and unless something unexpected happens in terms of someone being bought out or a shock move or whatever, there'd be no way into McLaren for a couple of years at the absolute minimum. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. I imagine Bortoleto, obviously he'll be delighted to be on the grid. I can see maybe there would have been a bit of appeal to staying in the McLaren ecosystem given where Audi is. And that's my one concern, is that because of where the team is at the moment, where Sauber is, obviously Audi owns all of it. So this is the kind of prelude to the name above the door changing in 2026 and them having their own engine. But yeah, there's still some question marks there. So there'll be a little bit in the back of Bortoleto's mind where he's like, well, I hope this comes off very, very well. Although I did rather enjoy, where is it? There was a great quote in the press release, which I don't know if you clocked. He said, "This is one of the most exciting projects in motorsport, if not in all of sports." I think he's got a bit carried. He's got to say that. Be quoted as saying that sort of thing. But yeah,
I'm not sure I describe it at that at the moment because there's a few question marks, but it's good he's getting into the spirit of it.
Yeah, exactly. Little bit of hyperbole, but I think if you can't be excused that on the day you become a Formula One driver, when can you be excused it? I mean, we talked, didn't we, before the Brazilian Grand Prix on the podcast about the potential pitfalls of coming into F1 with Sauber for Bortoleto, who's clearly very keen to get on the grid. And there is some great long-term potential there, potential being the kind of key word there. And Bortoleto needs to be given the patience to learn the ropes in F1 and then be there when it starts to pay off as a project. I think the key thing for him is getting on the grid next year. That there was a bit of umming and ahhing with it, really, and a lot of suggestions in the Interlagos paddock that one of the uncertainties was not putting him in straight away for 2025, but potentially waiting for 2026, which made no sense.
Yeah, I didn't understand that.
No, if you're going to do it for 25. That's what they've done in the end. So fascinated to see more of him, because I was really impressed with the way that he came to the fore in Formula 3 and won that title. And he's been impressive actually from the start in Formula 2. Once again, doing that thing that not just me, but a lot of people really like, which is obviously standing out as a rookie driver. And as I think he's part of Fernando Alonso's management, and Alonso's pointed out, he's one of, if not the only real F2 rookie in terms of the testing and preparation he's got. Only 20 years old, clearly lots and lots of potential. Driven well in Formula 2 this year. The ascension to the top of the points was aided by a strategy-assisted win at Monza in the feature race there, but he drove very, very well in that race to make the most of that opportunity. And like I said, really he's been quick from the get-go. I think he was on pole, proper pole, was in top qualifying way back at the first round of the F2 season with the new car, so slightly jumbled grid and whatnot, or pecking order, but you don't do that if you're not a driver with a lot of ability. So yeah, I'm excited to see more of him in an F1 context. I just hope he's got a better quality of car than the drivers he's replacing.
Yeah, well, that was always the thing. We mentioned that question of do they wait a year? The only argument that was being made for that was, it could, if they struggle, he could lose all his credibility or whatever. But Audi will have him on a long-term deal. And what they've also got to just do is say, look, we want you to do well in 25, but you are our guy for the long term. So even if 25 is difficult, if we've got a poor car and we're struggling, as has been the case this year, because it's been a pretty horrible season if you've been driving a Sauber, as long as you just have that support and you don't start suddenly blaming the driver for it, then you're absolutely fine. And he can kind of treat 25 as quite a nice little way to play himself in. I mean, obviously, he'll want to get the results, he'll want to perform, he'll want to show what he can do, because that's what all drivers are there to do. But they've just got to make sure that they back him and support him. And I think you can't really fault the choice. And it's good that the driver who will be, might be, probably should be, could be F2 champion, that won't be decided until the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix weekend. There's been all this talk about, the drivers down the order are getting through. So it is good that you may well have the champion stepping up as well. And yeah, it's nice to have this injection.
It's been a while.
Exactly, yeah. And it's nice to have this injection of young drivers, because genuinely, I do like teams going for this sort of option. My only little asterisk against Sauber was where they were. I think if it was a team that was more in the midfield, I might have said, actually, probably this is the time to pick a Bortoleto. But I hope they look after him and they allow him to show what he can do, because he's got a great yardstick in Nico Hulkenberg. But it's a yardstick that I'd say is very handy to have, because he's quick, he's good, but he's also beatable.
Well, look at Ollie Behrman.
Yeah,
stepping in 2 weekends at Haas as a substitute for Kevin Magnussen. First one was Baku, which wasn't Hulkenberg's best track, so it was a little bit of, is that? How much of that is down to, some specifics? But Behrman did a great job there and out-qualified him, and then snuck past him at the end of the race. And then in Brazil, stepped straight in and was just massively, massively quick in the dry, quicker than Hulkenberg, and actually was really quick in the wet as well. And I'd say, I think, faster than Hulkenberg in the wet as well. Just had way too many errors in the Grand Prix, but it showed that as good as Hulkenberg has been, Behrman is immediately on that level. And it's the same with, Frank, like Colapinto alongside Alex Albon has looked good against a driver very, very well established. So that's Bortoletto's chance there, isn't it? It's a great opportunity, even if they end up only fighting amongst themselves for most of the season, like championship wise, because it's the 10th best car, or in other words, the slowest car rather. He's still going to have something whereby there's a relevant yardstick. Whereas, like, frankly, what I think one of the reasons why Bottas is being dropped, we'll come on to him obviously in a little bit, but is because ultimately he's got 3 years of beating Zhou Guanyu, who doesn't have a stellar reputation in F1. Whatever Bortoleto does against Hulkenberg is ultimately, in the eyes of the F1 world and the people watching, is a more relevant benchmark.
The Race F1 podcast is brought to you by Merrill. It's no secret that finances can get complicated. Like me, I'm sure many of you listening will have financial goals. Perhaps it's even saving up for that trip to a Grand Prix far afield. Whatever your goals are, from starting a business to saving for kids' college to getting more stamps in your passport, you want a straightforward path there. But life tends to have other plans, and things get in your way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan that can help keep your money in sync with your life. So with the bull at your back, no matter what life brings, you get a clear path forward. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Your time and expertise are valuable. And with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. And best of all, Grammarly works across 500,000 apps and websites, allowing you to work smarter, not longer. For 15 years, Grammarly has helped professionals do more with their writing. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast. We'll talk a bit more about Sauber and Audi in a moment. Just a reminder about the Race Members Club. Of course, you often hear questions from members of the Race Members Club on this podcast. There's many other benefits to joining. You can get 15% off in the Race shop. We get exclusive podcasts. In fact, we've recorded an exclusive members podcast this week with Glenn Freeman and Lito Cavalcanti, tackling some of the questions outstanding from the Brazilian Grand Prix, talking about Lewis Hamilton, the Senna demonstration. I'd like to be able to say whether that's out or not, but I've got no idea what day it is, what time it is, what's happening because of my travel schedule. That it'll be there at some point very soon, I'm sure. But we've definitely recorded it. That I know happened in the past. And mentioning that 15% off in the Race shop, we've now got the 2025 calendars available, the Bring Back V10s, F1 and MotoGP calendars. They've got loads of incredible photography from our friends at XPB Images and Golden Goose. There's two sizes, A3 calendar, A5 calendar, and the race dates for 2025 are all in there as well. Head to the link in the description to check them out. Really good, and I'm delighted to say that the Bring Back V10s calendar, I'm assured, has an Andrea Moda in it somewhere, so I'm very happy about that. Right, Scott, let's get back to Sauber and Audi, because it's taken an enormously long time to sort out the driver lineup. It was definitely not in the plan for this to run all the way through to November. What does it say about the project that it's made such heavy weather of things in the driver market?
That it's inefficient It is flawed, and it's also unappealing to established top-line drivers who you would expect to be queuing up to try and get an Audi work seat in Formula One. In fact, I thought this would be one of the most coveted seats in the market because you're planning ahead to 2026. But Sauber's nosedive over the last 18 months or so, you can trace it actually back earlier, can't you, to sort of mid to late 2022. But they were able to see out that season off the back of how successful really the first half of that year was. But the 22 was the year that we found out about Audi's engine program and then latterly buying Sauber, and the contrast between, if you take the ground effect era as the start of 22, what Sauber has done pre-Audi news and post-Audi news is an astonishing contrast. It's basically lost all form and function in Formula One since the Audi news. It feels like the last 2 years have been wasted, frankly, in terms of growing this team and making it what it needs to be. And that is reflected in the driver's attitude towards it. You know, their primary target was Carlos Sainz, big swing and a big embarrassing miss. For him to go to Williams over Audi, if he'd gone to Alpine, for all of their problems, it is the Renault Works team. And you kind of would have that would have been a bit more understandable. And obviously, if he'd managed to get an offer from a Red Bull or a Mercedes, there's no question. But to lose out to Williams, which is
that's just a hammer blow, isn't it? That's a really, really bad reflection of where you are.
Massively so. It is. It's the driver market equivalent of a middle finger to the project, isn't it? Which is a shame. I mean, and Bottas had to kind of come back around to wanting to stay. Too. He was really looking at his options elsewhere, and then no one else entered the picture, did they? In terms of established ones, Esteban Ocon for a bit, and while I think there was definitely an element of Andreas Seidel, Mattia Binotto's predecessor, not being serious about Ocon or not feeling too serious about Ocon. You know, Ocon was ultimately allowed to just do his Haas deal and get that done because, as I understand it, at the time, the view that Seidel and Audi had was that if Ocon was available, great. If not, so be it. So it wasn't that they said no to him exactly, whereas I think Williams did. Williams actively went, no, that's not going to work. We don't want you. We're fully set on Sainz, basically. And then I think Bottas became their backup option. So Ocon basically chose Haas over waiting to see if the Audi seat would become available. And another hammer blow. So you've lost two of your targets to Williams and Haas.
And you've got one driver, the one you signed back in April, Nico Hulkenberg, who's probably looking at it thinking, well, it's a nice deal, but would I rather be at Haas next year?
Well, Hulkenberg will be consoling himself with all of the non-competitive reasons to join Audi. The fact that he'll be getting an increased salary, the fact that there's potential there that isn't there at Haas in the very long term, assuming Hulkenberg can stick around for long enough for it to pay off. The fact that he got what seems to be a 3-year fixed contract as well, which is very good for him. And the possibility of ambassadorial duties longer term, get into the Audi family and then stick around in it for a while. Who knows, maybe post F1 racing opportunities as well. And I say all of this, there's no disrespect to Bortoleto because he is obviously a very good young driver, but they have had to get to the point where they make this decision on U4 experience for the second seat, which was a decision that they weren't intending to make. And I think when Binotto came in, didn't intend to make it because he'd have hoped there'd be more time to win Carlos Sainz over. So Bortoleto's ended up the best available option for those who are still left and want to drive for Sauber, basically, which is ultimately a smaller pool of drivers. I think it actually ends up being the choice between Bottas and Bortoleto is frankly a better choice than Sauber deserves to have at this point. That team, I don't think that team deserves to be choosing between. Bottas, I think, is still the fourth most successful driver on the current grid. And the guy who's probably going to win, not probably going to win, has a very good chance of winning Formula 2 this season because I think there's only 4.5 points between him and Isaac Hadjar. So that's actually ended up being a pretty good calibre of driver for Audi to choose from. And right now, frankly, the drivers that they had to choose from and the driver that they've signed merit more than if they repeat it this year, more than what Sauber's offering.
And also wavering decision-making, because Bottas, all the stuff about pay and length of deal, that wasn't an issue. All of the details were sorted out around Singapore time, and then they were still sort of messing about trying to work out whether they want to go through for youth or experience. I mean, there are some positive signs for Sauber. Obviously, they've made a few structural changes. They brought Gianpaolo Dallara back as head of race engineering. Obviously, Beat Zender's taking on whatever that strangely director of signature programs and operations. Beat Zender, he's not a massively high profile figure.
Is that Swiss German for special projects?
No, I don't think so. Zender's very, very sharp. He's been at that. He's been basically team manager for that team since right back at the start in Formula One, and in fact before that.
Yeah, but then wouldn't it be very, very Audi to come in and sideline that level of expertise to do it your own way?
Yeah, I think I'm taking that as a genuine appointment. And look at what happened at Interlagos when Bottas was just being told, no, it's not a new formation lap, it's an aborted start, you stay there. They only went once everyone else had, and they were told the engine temps were in trouble. So, yeah, it was a really good... that's a really sharp operator. So Jonathan Wheatley obviously is coming in next year as team principal. Obviously, Mattia Binotto, a mixed bag of success at Ferrari, but, someone with a lot of experience, very accomplished. So there's movement there, and they've obviously got that... as was agreed quite a while ago, this was put in place, but that adjustment in the cost cap to allow them to pay a little bit more, because you can have an adjustment for how much, depending on what the wage level in different places, and Switzerland happens to be reasonably high. But my biggest concern with Audi is they're aiming to expand up to 900, just over 900, something like that, and it's been really slow. Williams has just ballooned in terms of the size of the staff really rapidly. Sauber has been a lot slower, and that's my worry about this whole team. They had this wonderful run-up because the Audi were involved from 22, and it wasn't going to be Audi until 2026. What a wonderful situation. I feel too much time has been squandered, and I think the drivers are just a symptom, a downstream symptom of all that.
Well, ultimately, they're at a point now where the driver choice in the short term doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I don't see a scenario...
The drivers aren't the problem this year.
No, and I don't see a scenario where whether you had Bottas or Bortoleto in the car next year actually makes a great deal of difference. I mean, it's possible that they make enough of a step to be more competitive in the midfield and actually be in a Constructors' Championship fight with someone next year, but I see no reason why they shouldn't be the last place team right now. So it's all about trying to make 2026 as respectable as possible, because it will be compromised. The Audi era will start in compromised form, certainly. So the drivers almost don't make a difference for quite a while. But in a way, that's kind of a good reason to go with someone like Bortoleto. Like I said, he's the long-term play, and he probably can have a year next year getting up to speed out of the spotlight. That could be beneficial in its own way. Although we have seen that the young drivers that are really ready for F1 and good enough to come in and make a name for themselves actually don't need much of a glide path into F1. They're ready to come in and start making a name for themselves. Yeah,
exactly. Just depends whether they've got the car under them. So, yeah, there's a long way to go for Audi. They have, as of a few months ago, slightly revised that horizon for success for fighting for race wins, which I think was originally 28 they were talking about, wasn't it? Which sounded a bit optimistic at the time. I don't think they put a number on it yet, have they? But it feels like it's next rule change, so sort of 2030 kind of time.
2030 onwards, yeah.
Yeah, so a long way to go for them. Wasted quite a lot of time. But I do think Bortoleto coming in is a decent choice, and they're looking for the long term there. They've backed their horse and very much hope it pays off.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch Pierce Fenner & Smith Incorporated registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC. This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch Pierce Fenner & Smith Incorporated registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Welcome to Valtteri Bottas Sympathy Corner.
Well, Scott, I guess it was inevitable we were going to find ourselves here in Valtteri Bottas Sympathy Corner during this podcast. He was on the shortlist for a number of teams. For a long time, it looked like he was going to end up somewhere. And even when it was only Audi, Sauber, he looked in pretty good shape, but the driver market music has stopped. He's not a contender for any of that Red Bull nonsense that's going on with all their drivers. So he's frozen out at the moment. So do you think that's it for his F1 career?
Not immediately in terms of disappearing from F1, because I suspect he will stay involved next year and do a deal to be one of Mercedes' reserve drivers. But it could be it for his Grand Prix racing career. And I think you might be responsible, Ed, because I'm pretty sure we have sat here, not literally, but on this podcast and discussed Bottas a few times, and I'm pretty sure I have asked you at least a couple of times, it just feels like there's a chance like he could end up missing out because he'll always be sort of second or third choice everywhere. And you've always said with great confidence, I think Bottas will be all right. I think Bottas will be all right. Well, look what you've done, Ed. You forced him out of F1 just so you could have one glorious sympathy corner. I hope you're happy with yourself.
Exactly. Well, I was, obviously overconfidence in Bottas. And it is always the danger. If you are everyone's second, third, fourth, fifth choice, you may never be their first choice, no matter.
But it was ridiculous because at one point it was like 4 different teams that he was having conversations with.
Yeah. Well, he was basically all the teams down the grid. So if Sainz hadn't signed for Williams, Bottas would have gone to Williams. So, it could have gone very, very differently. Now, I think Bottas still has something to offer in Formula One. I'm not going to say it's wrong to have dropped him for Bortoleto at all, because Bortoleto is a very, very high-quality prospect. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's doing. And equally, I'm not going to be... We are in Valtteri Bottas Sympathy Corner, but I'm not going to have monstrous amounts of sympathy for him because he's had a long and successful Grand Prix career. Valtteri Bottas will be fine. But I do still think there's something to offer in Formula One. I would imagine if he does do that Mercedes reserve role deal, the strategy is hang around in F1 for a year, see how the driver market plays out, see if you can do a Hulkenberg and come back. And if not, go and do something else. Bottas has got a lot of other interests in life. I'm sure he'll do some other motorsport elsewhere, various business interests, etc. So he will be fine. And that feels to me like the kind of logical strategy, because it was pretty late to go chasing other stuff. And although they have been looking around, until you know that you're definitely not there, and if you're sitting there with basically a deal framework agreed, there's a good chance you could get a phone call and Bottas says, yep, you're in, you're announced, done. So the timing isn't ideal for him, but that seems to me the logical strategy for him.
To go back to your point about it not being wrong, I agree, because I think Bortoleto a good candidate in his own right. But at the same time, quite literally at the same time, that can be true, and you can think it's very unfortunate that Bottas has dropped off the grid, and borderline unfair that he hasn't been able to find a way to extend his F1 career, because this isn't it's not a Logan Sargent getting dropped mid-season because he's underperforming. It's not even really Daniel Ricciardo, because I would say that Bottas has been consistently more convincing through his Sauber stint, and especially this season, than Ricciardo was there. Ditto Kevin Magnussen at Haas, or Sergio Perez at Red Bull if he ends up on the scrap heap there, as it looks like he might. There's a clear out currently, isn't there, of older drivers, but Bottas is the exception, isn't he, of those 4 that I've just mentioned, because he's still performing. So in that sense, do you think he's been hard done by? Do you think it's unfair that he'll be out of a drive?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfair, well, F1's a brutal sort of place, isn't it? I certainly don't think he's done anything to say he shouldn't be around next year. Let's put it that way. Now, there were some questions, particularly last year, about inside the team, about the application and the focus and that kind of thing. But it's been pretty good this year. And I'm a little bit concerned that there was I get the impression that within Audi, there'd been a little bit of blaming the drivers going on. And I do feel that's a little bit of a mistake, because remember, Toyota in their first year, though, one of the things they did was blame the drivers, blame Alan McNish and Mika Salo for the fact that their car was hopeless, and clear them out. Oh, shockingly, it's not making a huge difference. So you've got to be careful of that. So yeah, I feel a degree of sympathy, but I'm sort of in an. I can't say he's made an overwhelming case, because if he was, for example, Max Verstappen, and operating at that level, then there's no
that
way
team
he'd
would
be dropped.
still have 0 points.
Well, exactly. That's true. But he would be performing well and probably wouldn't be. He'd be performing stunningly and probably wouldn't be dropped. Although you never know. You do drag the reputation down with struggling. So I think probably the sympathy comes to with Sauber moving on from him. He hasn't really been able to make such a compelling case because other teams, they know when teams are rubbish, but Sauber has been a bit of a mess this year. There's been a lot going on there in terms of just mistakes and just things that you don't necessarily hear about publicly that have held them back as well. And if they didn't have that pit stop problem, I'm pretty sure Bottas would have nabbed a point or two early on. He was in contention in Australia, Suzuka. So he was the one that was almost getting them points on a few occasions when the car was just a bit slow rather than terrible.
So let me frame the fairness question a different way. Not necessarily in terms of staying on the grid, because I agree with you in terms of he's had a long career. He's had a longer career than a lot of drivers get to have. He's had great opportunities. And yes, I think if he'd been maybe a fraction better, not all the time, but not had any low moments. There was a point where it felt like Zhou Guanyu's trajectory was such that actually Bottas wasn't convincingly better than him. I'm thinking sort of across that, that last little bit of 22 and then through 23, Zhou looked pretty good at times alongside Bottas, even though Bottas, I think, was always the stronger driver. So let's say we understand that there's clearly a reason why he was never the number one choice for several teams, and that in itself is telling. What about his treatment at the hands of Sauber? Has that been unfair in your eyes? Because there are two different team bosses now, or two different project leaders, rather, who have been there this year, who have handled negotiations with Bottas. One of them, the first one, froze him out, made it very clear that he wasn't part of the future, seemed to be blaming him and Zhou for stuff. Made Bottas, frankly, in my opinion, look and sound like a driver who felt he was being forced out the team and didn't want to stay there anymore. And the second project boss, you could argue, went the other way, made Bottas feel really wanted and led him up the garden path. Because actually they've had things agreed for a really long time. Bottas has thought he's in a really good position for this. And they've just strung him along until they've found something better and then just left him in the lurch. Probably, 2 months later than they could have done? So now he can't get a drive anywhere else, even if he wanted to. Yeah,
that's not ideal. And if you look at the stuff that Valtteri Bottas said publicly around Singapore time, he was very, very confident because it seemed to be going that way. So yeah, I'm not sure they've been entirely clear. And if you want an example of it, this is from earlier in the season. He turned up in, was it China? And his race engineer had changed, and they'd not told him. Miami, rather, yes.
He'd found out a few days before, but he wasn't consulted on it, and it was still very late. And it was still very late that he found out.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily ideal, but there is also the underpinning thing of you also partly make your own luck, and you can always do better. We know how good Valtteri Bottas is, but we also know that he does have some limitations as a driver. We saw that at Mercedes. But so, what I mean is you can always, regardless of all the prevailing circumstances, you can always do that little bit better to make sure you don't end up in this scenario. So, a little bit unfair. But I tend not too much to subscribe to the unfair treatment thing of any driver because, it's top-line elite sport and it is pretty brutal.
It is. I just think, especially in F1, there are certain times where I think greater transparency is possible. I understand why it isn't.
You should always be transparent with your drivers, and I think that's not necessarily been the case. You never know what's said behind closed doors, but I'm not completely convinced of that that was done right.
The only thing I was going to say, because I was essentially playing Bottas advocate in that previous point about the treatment at the hands of the project bosses. The only thing I do wonder, almost on Binotto's side, is the fact it was so drawn out when McLaren seemed pretty happy on the right terms to let Bortoleto go. Feels like if they were absolutely unified, both the Sauber and Audi side, that Bortoleto was the way to go, not Bottas, that could have been done a lot sooner than it was. And that tells me that someone, and I do think it might be Binotto, because Dolner's quote in the release was much more effusive about sort of Bortoleto and going with youth. Not that Binotto's clearly happy to have a driver like Bortoleto. I'm not saying that he's not, but it makes me think that Binotto was very, very interested in keeping Bottas if possible, and that is where the messaging to Bottas came from. What I don't know is whether it took them 2 months of hard evaluation to determine whether or not Bortoleto was worth the punt over Bottas straight away, or if there might be something like a bit of disagreement over which of Hulkenberg or Bottas would be the better experienced option longer term. So I did wonder if there was a scenario playing out whereby Binotto maybe wanted to have a year of Hulkenberg and Bottas together to see which one of those would be paired with Bortoleto longer term. That was sort of, because something's not quite there, is it? In terms of, there's a little bit of misalignment somewhere in terms of who was the right pick for 25, because this got dragged out way too long for something that was a super easy decision.
Yeah, I do wonder if there's not full alignment between Audi and the team side. I'm globally a bit concerned about this project in terms of the way Audi's handling it. Let's see how it plays out. It could settle down. That's a bit of a concern. And of course, you've also got the question of Hulkenberg having signed before Binotto was there. So you could say, well, would he have been his choice? I do think there's an element of that thing you mentioned earlier about the age. The 35-year-old and 37-year-old is not the age profile you want across a two-driver lineup. That probably made life difficult for Bottas. The fact Hulkenberg was signed up so early probably counted against Bottas as well. So there's a lot of circumstances going on there as well. We should quickly talk about Zhou Guanyu as well. It's been eminently clear for a very long time that he wasn't going to be re-signed by Sauber, despite his best efforts to keep positive about his chances every time he was asked about his future. But what next for Zhou?
He is still being optimistic about his chances of remaining involved in F1. I think he's looking to get some kind of reserve deal somewhere, which I believe you suggested to him months ago. But he was very clear that he wasn't interested in a reserve role. Because I
think that was as long ago as like Canada or something when he was sort of talking about it. So yeah, but you're not going to get a driver. Not quite words to that effect. But I was sort of saying, well, you might have to, reserve might be the way to go because a race drive's looking pretty unlikely.
Yeah, and the reason obviously this has been focused a lot more on Bottas missing out rather than Zhou missing out is, one, because Bottas has the much better, longer career and is a better driver and has a better reputation. So it's a bigger deal for Bottas to be stepping out of F1 than Zhou, who most people would probably think that 3 years in F1 is a decent enough crack for him. And the second reason is that nobody thought that Zhou was really in contention, whereas Bottas was. I think he was even described by Binotto in the release as saying that Bottas was leaving as a key candidate for 25. So he's been overtly in the frame since Binotto came in and took that job. Whereas Zhou's the one who's been positioning himself as a candidate, isn't he?
Yeah.
Nobody else. And again, similar to what you were saying to Bottas, like, I don't have a huge amount of sympathy for Zhou because I don't think he's been good enough to command another chance in F1. But I have some sympathy because there have been some good flashes in his time at Sauber. And this year, when there was a chance to build on the promise of 2023 in parts, just seems to have completely robbed him of any confidence and standing within the paddock. Because I do think there's times this year where Zhou's been made to look a lot worse than he actually is. As an F1 prospect. So I don't feel it's an injustice that Zhou's falling off the grid, but it's a shame when any driver who spends their time ultimately with a backmarker, because apart from the first half of 22, that is what Sauber's been in his time there, really. You never really get a chance to show your full potential in F1. Ultimately, very few drivers do, but if you're a young driver and your stint is confined to an environment like that and it only goes downhill at the very end, that is just not a pleasant position to see anybody in, is it?
Yeah, and there's just been a lot of problems on that side of the garage in particular, just made it a little bit harder. I'm not, again, I think I've said from the start, I've always thought that Zhou certainly lacked that edge of pace, and I think I'd stand by that. He works well with the team. He's pretty consistent, works quite well with everyone. So So he's shown in F1 he's a very capable driver, but it's been clear for a long time he's not going to be staying on. He's had 3 years in F1. You'd probably say fair. That's pretty good. The one thing I think is a little bit of a shame is from the perspective of if you look at the reaction in China, and I'm not just talking about that acclamation he got from the main grandstand. China this year is the only time when you weren't in China, Scott. You know when you go across the track and you're out in that sort of area where we come in through, and between that and there's a station in the road, and it's normally fairly dead. There's not many people there. There's a few people hanging around. This year, there were just throngs of people, and that was the Zhou effect. And it's a shame, I think, that Formula One won't have a Chinese driver, because I think Formula One is better off with a good spread of drivers from all different regions. And I think it's a shame Formula One's lost that. And again, it's that usual thing of, well, if there are a few more seats, maybe he could have hung around, because he was certainly a safe pair of hands option. Let's put it that way. But it's hard to imagine him finding an F1 race seat again. But get a reserve role, maybe go and do something else. Looking at things like IndyCar, World Endurance Championship, he could be really, really good in sports cars, and I don't mean that as damning with faint praise, but he's really, really, really consistent. You could put him in for a race and he'd manage it well, wouldn't drop it, would just bang in the lap times, and I think he'd work very well alongside other drivers in that regard as well. So I think Zhou is a driver who I hope has a bright future still in motorsport, and I'm sure we'll see him elsewhere, but I wouldn't be surprised if we never see him start a Grand Prix again. Well, we've covered plenty of ground in that sudden podcast. I think Scott's going to pass out if I keep him going too much longer. So thanks very much, Scott.
Thanks, Ed. I hope you enjoy your time in DC. Try not to get involved in any riots or insurrections or anything wayward in the world of US politics, because you've picked a particularly tasty time to land in the capital.
Yeah, it seems to have all been nice and relaxed from what I've seen, but I haven't been here for very, very long. But although I'm a long way from the world of Formula One right now, we will still be podcasting through this little mini gap. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.